The sun blazed down on the Henderson farm outside Millbrook, Texas, where 3 generations of drought had finally broken the family. Tom Henderson wiped grease from his hands as he stared at the ancient John Deere tractor he'd just bought for $50, pure scrap metal, or so he thought. When the engine seized completely, Tom grabbed his wrench to salvage what parts he could. But as the engine block cracked open, something impossible glinted back at him. Not engine parts, not metal shavings, diamonds, hundreds of them, each one flawless, packed tight where pistons should have been. Tom's hands trembled as he realized he was holding millions of dollars in stolen gems, gems that disappeared from a museum heist 20 years ago, the same heist that made his late uncle disappear without a trace. Now Tom understood why Uncle Eddie never came home, and why that old tractor had been hidden in the barn all these years. But as sirens wailed in the distance, Tom realized someone else knew the truth, someone who'd been watching, waiting, someone willing to kill for what he'd just found. But who was Uncle Eddie really, and how deep do the family's secrets go? The sirens grew louder, and Tom's heart hammered against his ribs. He stuffed handfuls of diamonds into his work shirt pockets, the weight of them foreign and terrifying. The rest he quickly scooped back into the engine cavity, his mind racing. 20 years. Eddie had been gone 20 years, and all this time the family thought he'd simply run off like the black sheep he'd always been. "Tom," his wife Sarah's voice carried across the yard from the farmhouse. "There's police cars coming up the drive." His blood turned to ice. How could they possibly know, unless someone had been watching him work on the tractor? The thought made his skin crawl as he glanced toward the tree line that bordered their property. How long had he been exposed out here in the open? Tom slammed the engine housing back together, his hands shaking so badly he could barely grip the wrench. The diamonds in his pockets felt like they weighed 1,000 pounds each. He had maybe 60 seconds before those police cars reached the barn. "Sarah, get the kids inside," he called back, trying to keep his voice steady. "Lock the doors." The sound of gravel crunching under tires echoed from the front drive. Tom wiped his hands on a shop rag and forced himself to breathe. He was just a farmer working on an old tractor. Nothing more. But the diamonds pressing against his chest told a different story entirely. 2 police cruisers pulled up to the barn, dust swirling in their wake. Tom recognized Sheriff Martinez stepping out of the first car, but the second vehicle held a man in an expensive suit who definitely wasn't local law enforcement. The stranger's eyes swept the property with the calculated gaze of a predator, and when they landed on Tom, he felt exposed despite being fully clothed. "Afternoon, Tom," Sheriff Martinez called out, his voice carrying an odd tension. "Got a call about some unusual activity out here. Mind if we take a look around?" Tom's mouth went dry. "What kind of activity, Sheriff? I've just been working on this old tractor I picked up at the Miller auction yesterday." The man in the suit stepped forward, and Tom noticed the bulge of a shoulder holster beneath his jacket. "Mr. Henderson, I'm Agent Kozlov with a federal task force. We have reason to believe you may have come into possession of certain items of interest to our investigation." Federal. Tom's knees nearly buckled. This wasn't some random check-in from the local sheriff. Somehow, impossibly, they knew exactly what he'd found. "I'm not sure what you mean," Tom managed, but his voice cracked on the words. One of the diamonds in his pocket shifted, and he was sure they could all hear it rattling like a death knell. Agent Kozlov's smile was cold as winter steel. "The tractor you purchased belonged to Edward Henderson. Your uncle, I believe?" The same Edward Henderson who disappeared in 2004, shortly after the theft of the Millennium Collection from the Dallas Museum of Natural History. The world tilted sideways. Tom gripped the edge of his workbench to keep from falling over. They knew everything. About Eddie, about the heist, about the diamonds currently burning holes through his shirt pockets. "My uncle ran off when I was in high school," Tom said carefully. "We never heard from him again." "No," Agent Kozlov said, stepping closer. "He didn't run off. He was murdered. Shot twice in the head and dumped in Lake Texoma 3 weeks after the heist, but the diamonds were never recovered." His eyes glittered dangerously. "Until now." Tom's vision blurred at the edges. Eddie was dead, had been dead for 20 years, which meant someone else had hidden the diamonds in that tractor engine, someone who knew exactly where they were, someone who'd been patient enough to wait 2 decades for the right moment to retrieve them, someone who was probably watching right now. The morning sun cast long shadows across the Hendricks farm as Jake paced back and forth in the barn, his worn boots scuffing against the concrete floor. The opened engine still sat on the workbench, its metal innards exposed like a patient on an operating table. But it wasn't the engine that held his attention. It was the small fortune in diamonds scattered across an old tarp beside it. "We should call the police," Sarah said for the 3rd time, though her voice carried less conviction with each repetition. She stood with her arms crossed, eyeing the gems with a mixture of fascination and fear. Tom emerged from the house carrying 3 cups of coffee and a magnifying glass he'd found in their junk drawer. "I've been thinking," he said, setting the cups down carefully away from the diamonds. "These weren't just stuffed in there randomly. Look at this." He held up a small plastic bag that had been tucked behind the gems. Inside was a folded piece of paper, yellowed with age and moisture damage. With trembling fingers, he extracted it and smoothed it out on the workbench. The writing was faded but legible. Insurance policy 127B. Johannesburg delivery never completed. MK 1987. Johannesburg, Jake muttered. "That's South Africa, right? Diamond country." Sarah picked up the magnifying glass and examined one of the larger stones. Even to her untrained eye, it was clearly valuable, flawless and brilliant, catching the morning light streaming through the barn's dirty windows. "Tom, how much do you think these are worth?" "I don't know, but—" Tom pulled out his phone and started typing. After a few minutes of searching, his face went pale. "According to this, diamonds of this quality can go for anywhere from $5,000 to $50,000 per carat, depending on the cut and clarity." Jake's coffee cup froze halfway to his lips. "How many carats we talking about here?" Tom looked at the pile of gems, then back at his phone. "I'm guessing we're looking at maybe 20, 30 stones? Some of them are pretty big. Even conservatively, we could be talking about millions," Sarah whispered. The 3 siblings fell silent, the weight of that number settling over them like a heavy blanket. The farm's mortgage was $180,000. Their father's medical bills had topped $75,000. Jake's truck needed a new transmission. Sarah's daughter needed money for college. All of their problems could disappear with these stones. "But why were they in Dad's tractor?" Jake asked, breaking the spell. "He bought that thing used from Peterson's farm back in '88. Old Pete's been dead for 15 years. Maybe Peterson didn't know," Tom suggested. "Maybe whoever hid them there never got the chance to come back for them." Sarah frowned, studying the note again. "Or maybe they tried to come back and couldn't find them. Tractors get sold, moved around. This could have been hidden for 35 years. A distant rumbling made them all look up. A black SUV was making its way down their long gravel driveway, moving fast enough to kick up a substantial dust cloud. "You expecting anyone?" Jake asked. Tom shook his head, but his gut was already tightening with unease. In 32 years of living on this farm, unexpected visitors usually meant bad news, creditors, tax assessors, or people serving papers. "Hide them," Sarah said suddenly, her maternal instincts kicking in. "Right now." The 3 of them moved with surprising coordination, quickly gathering the diamonds and shoving them into an old toolbox. Tom snapped the lid shut and pushed it under the workbench, just as the SUV's doors slammed outside. 2 men approached the barn. The first was tall and lean, wearing an expensive suit that looked completely out of place on a struggling farm. His companion was shorter but broader, with the kind of build that suggested he'd learned his manners in places where talking wasn't the preferred method of conflict resolution. "Good morning," the tall man called out as he entered the barn. His accent was subtle but definitely foreign. South African, Tom realized with a chill. "I'm looking for the current owners of this property." "That'd be us," Jake said, stepping forward with the kind of protective stance he'd learned in the Marines. "Can I help you?" The man smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "My name is Marcus Kruger. I represent certain interests in Johannesburg. I have reason to believe that an item of great sentimental value to my clients may have found its way onto your property many years ago." Tom felt sweat begin to bead on his forehead despite the morning chill. The timing was too coincidental, too perfect. "What kind of item?" Sarah asked, though her voice came out smaller than she'd intended. Kruger's gaze swept the barn, taking in every detail. The opened tractor engine, the scattered tools, the three siblings standing protectively close together. His smile widened slightly. "Oh, I think you already know, don't you? Perhaps we should sit down and have a civilized conversation about this. I'd hate for there to be any misunderstandings." The man's companion stepped closer, his jacket falling open just enough to reveal a shoulder holster. The rusty padlock on Ezra's workshop snapped with surprising ease, metal fragments scattering across the concrete floor. Jake pushed the heavy door open, hinges screaming in protest after years of disuse. Dust motes danced in the afternoon sunlight that streamed through grimy windows, illuminating a graveyard of farm equipment that hadn't run since the Clinton administration. "Haven't been in here since Dad died," Ezra muttered, stepping over a pile of corroded chain links. "Kept meaning to clean it out, but you were too busy trying to keep the farm from going under," Jake finished, understanding the weight of unfinished business that followed death. His own father's toolshed remained untouched 3 years after the funeral. The John Deere 4020 squatted in the back corner like a green metal dinosaur, its paint faded to the color of old moss. One tire had gone completely flat, and rust bloomed across its hood in abstract patterns. But Jake could see the solid bones beneath the decay. These old tractors were built to last, assuming you could get them running again. "Engine seized up back in '98, Ezra said, running his hand along the fender. "Dad always said he'd fix her up, but the newer equipment took priority. Then the newer equipment started breaking down too, and we couldn't afford to fix anything." Jake popped the hood and peered into the engine compartment. The block was coated in a thick layer of grime and oil, but the metal underneath appeared sound. "Pistons are probably stuck solid after sitting this long. We'll need to pull the whole engine, break it down completely." They spent the next 2 hours rigging a chain hoist to the workshop ceiling beams, testing the ancient pulley system that groaned ominously under the engine's weight. Ezra proved surprisingly handy with the tools, his movements gaining confidence as muscle memory returned. By sunset, they had the engine block sitting on Jake's workbench, ready for surgery. "I'll take it from here," Jake said, wiping his hands on an oil-stained rag. "Give me a week to see what we're dealing with." But curiosity got the better of him. After Ezra left, Jake found himself drawn back to the workshop, unable to resist poking at the mechanical puzzle before him. He'd always been the type to tear into projects immediately, driven by an almost compulsive need to understand how things worked, or why they didn't. He started with the cylinder head, carefully removing each bolt and cataloguing the parts in neat rows. The pistons were indeed seized solid, practically welded to the cylinder walls by decades of moisture and corrosion. But as he worked deeper into the engine's guts, something nagged at him. The weight distribution felt wrong somehow, as if the block carried more mass than it should. It was nearly midnight when he discovered the first anomaly. What should have been a standard oil passage had been deliberately welded shut, the bead barely visible under layers of accumulated grime. Someone had modified this engine, and they'd gone to considerable trouble to hide their work. Jake's pulse quickened as he traced the altered passages with his fingertips. More welds appeared under close inspection, all expertly done and carefully concealed. Someone had created a hidden cavity inside the engine block itself, accessible only by complete disassembly. He grabbed a flashlight and peered into the shadows between the cylinder walls. Something glinted back at him, definitely not cast iron or aluminum. Using a dental pick borrowed from his toolbox, he carefully extracted what looked like a small waterproof pouch, sealed in multiple layers of heavy plastic. The pouch felt substantial in his hands, maybe 8 ounces of something that shifted like loose stones when he shook it gently. Through the plastic he could make out irregular shapes, each about the size of a marble. His first thought was ball bearings, but the weight seemed wrong for steel. Jake's hands trembled slightly as he cut through the outer layer of plastic with a razor blade. Inside, wrapped in what looked like silk cloth, were perhaps 30 stones that caught the workshop's fluorescent lights and threw them back in brilliant sparkles of fire. Diamonds. Had to be. Even to his untrained eye, the clarity and cut were unmistakable. Each stone was expertly faceted, probably worth more money than he'd see in a lifetime of fixing engines. But how did they end up hidden inside a farmer's tractor in rural Indiana? He rewrapped the stones carefully, mind racing through possibilities. Drug money seemed most likely, someone using the old tractor as a storage spot, planning to retrieve their treasure when the heat died down. But the engine modifications would have taken serious skill and equipment. This wasn't some desperate addict stashing a score, this was professional work. Jake glanced toward the workshop's grimy windows, suddenly aware of how isolated Ezra's farm was, how dark the night had grown. Someone had hidden a fortune inside this engine, someone who clearly understood that discovery meant catastrophe, and now Jake held their secret in his oil-stained hands with absolutely no idea what to do next. The morning sun cast long shadows across the Mackenzie farm as Tom paced the kitchen, his phone pressed to his ear. He'd been trying to reach his contact at the auction house in Chicago for the past hour, but every call went straight to voicemail. Sarah sat at the kitchen table, the mysterious cylinder gleaming under the overhead light like a beacon of hope and terror. "Still nothing," Tom muttered, ending another failed call. "It's like Marcus just vanished." Sarah traced her finger along one of the engravings on the cylinder's surface. The metal felt warm to the touch, almost alive. Maybe that's for the best. After what happened yesterday, maybe we should think this through more carefully. The memory of the black sedan still haunted them both. It had appeared twice more after their initial sighting. Once parked at the end of their driveway around sunset, and again at 3 in the morning when Tom had gotten up for water. Each time it disappeared when they tried to get a better look. "We can't just sit on this forever," Tom said, frustration creeping into his voice. "The bank notice gives us 2 weeks. 2 weeks, Sarah. If this thing is worth what we think it is." A sharp knock at the front door cut him off. They both froze, eyes meeting across the kitchen. The knock came again, more insistent this time. Sarah quickly wrapped the cylinder in a dish towel and tucked it into the pantry behind a bag of flour. Tom grabbed the shotgun from behind the door and approached the window, peering through the curtains. A woman in her 50s stood on their porch, wearing a crisp navy blazer and carrying a leather briefcase. Her silver hair was pulled back in a perfect bun, and everything about her screamed expensive. A rental car sat in their driveway, definitely not the black sedan. "Can I help you?" Tom called through the door, not lowering the shotgun. "Mr. Mackenzie? My name is Victoria Ashford. I represent certain interested parties regarding an item that may have come into your possession. I'd very much like to speak with you and your wife." Tom and Sarah exchanged glances. Sarah shook her head vigorously, but Tom was already unlocking the door. They needed answers, and this woman might have them. Victoria Ashford smiled as she entered, her eyes immediately scanning the room with the practiced ease of someone accustomed to assessing situations quickly. "Thank you for seeing me. I apologize for the early hour, but time is rather critical in matters such as these." "What matters?" Sarah asked, her voice tight with tension. Victoria set her briefcase on the coffee table and opened it with 2 precise clicks. Inside, Tom caught a glimpse of documents, photographs, and what looked like a significant amount of cash. "3 days ago, you discovered something in an old tractor engine," Victoria said, her tone matter-of-fact. "Something that doesn't belong to you." "We bought that tractor fair and square," Tom said, raising the shotgun slightly. "Oh, I'm not questioning your ownership of the tractor, Mr. Mackenzie. But what you found inside was stolen from my client 70 years ago. We've been looking for it ever since." Victoria pulled out a black-and-white photograph and placed it on the table. It showed several men in military uniforms standing around what was unmistakably the same cylinder, though in the photo it appeared to be part of a larger collection of similar objects. During the final days of World War II, certain valuable items went missing from a transport convoy in occupied Germany. Most were recovered, but a few pieces vanished into the chaos of war. We believe a German officer attempted to smuggle them to safety, possibly planning to sell them in America. Sarah stepped closer to examine the photograph. What is it exactly? Let's just say it's a piece of history that certain parties would pay handsomely to recover. My clients are prepared to offer you a generous finder's fee, $500,000, in exchange for its return. Tom's grip on the shotgun loosened slightly. $500,000 would solve all their problems and then some. But something about Victoria's rehearsed explanation felt wrong. And if we say no? Sarah asked. Victoria's smile never wavered, but something cold flickered in her eyes. I sincerely hope you won't. My clients are not the only ones interested in this particular item. Others have been searching for it as well, people far less reasonable than myself. Your safety, and the safety of your family, depends on resolving this matter quickly. The threat was delivered with such polite precision that it took a moment to sink in. Tom raised the shotgun again. You need to leave, now. Victoria calmly closed her briefcase and stood. I'll give you 24 hours to consider my offer. After that, I'm afraid I can't guarantee your protection from the other parties involved. She walked to the door, then paused. Oh, and Mr. Mackenzie? I wouldn't recommend trying to sell it elsewhere. The auction houses, private collectors, museums, we monitor them all. There's nowhere you can take it that we won't know about. As her rental car disappeared down the driveway, Tom and Sarah realized they were trapped between multiple dangerous forces, all converging on their small farm. The black sedan had been parked across from Murphy's diner for 3 hours, its occupants watching through tinted windows as Jake and Sam finished their coffee and pie. Neither farmer noticed the vehicle as they stepped into the harsh afternoon sun, their conversation still focused on the mysterious contents of the tractor engine and their newfound fortune. Marcus Chen adjusted his rearview mirror and spoke into an encrypted phone. Subjects are moving, heading to their vehicle now. The voice on the other end was crisp, authoritative. Follow at distance. Do not engage until you have visual confirmation of the package. We need to know exactly what they recovered. Chen had been tracking unusual financial activity in the area for the past 48 hours. Large cash deposits, sudden wire transfers, and inquiries about high-end security services had all pinged the monitoring systems his organization maintained. When the trail led to 2 struggling farmers in rural Iowa, he knew they'd stumbled onto something significant. Jake climbed into his pickup truck, unaware that his every movement was being catalogued. The metallic briefcase sat locked in his bedroom safe, but the knowledge of its contents burned in his mind. The diamonds were just the beginning. The documents tucked beneath the velvet lining had revealed something far more valuable and infinitely more dangerous. Sam's hands trembled slightly as he buckled his seatbelt. Maybe we should have stayed quiet about this whole thing. That phone call you made to the appraiser, what if someone was listening? You're being paranoid, Jake replied, though his own nerves were fraying. The appraiser had been professional, discreet, but the man's reaction to their description of the stones had been telling. There had been a long pause, followed by careful questions about where exactly they'd been found. As Jake's truck pulled onto the county road, Chen's sedan fell into position 200 yards behind. The driver was a consummate professional, maintaining distance while keeping his targets in sight. His partner, Rodriguez, monitored communications frequencies and tracked any electronic signals emanating from the farmers' phones. "Command, we have a problem," Rodriguez said into his headset. "I'm picking up multiple sets of surveillance equipment in the area. We're not the only ones tracking these subjects." The implications sent a chill through Chen. If other parties were involved, the situation had just become exponentially more complicated. The contents of that tractor engine weren't just valuable, they were connected to something that multiple organizations considered worth killing for. Jake took the long route home, following back roads through cornfields and pasture land. The familiar landscape should have been comforting, but today it felt exposed, vulnerable. Every distant vehicle on the horizon seemed threatening. There, Sam pointed to a spot where the road crested a small hill. "That car's been behind us since we left town." Jake checked his mirrors, his stomach tightening. The black sedan was maintaining a steady distance, but it had definitely been there too long to be coincidence. "Hold on," he said, taking a sharp right onto a gravel farm road. Chen cursed as his target disappeared down the unpaved path. "They've made us," moving to intercept. But as he rounded the corner, the sedan immediately came under surveillance from a different source. High above, a drone equipped with telephoto cameras tracked the vehicle's movement while transmitting real-time footage to a command center 3 states away. Dr. Elizabeth Warren studied the feed on her monitor, her face grim. 25 years ago, she had been part of a classified research project that had ended in disaster and cover-up. The materials that Jake and Sam had discovered should have been destroyed decades ago. Their existence proved that someone had been lying to her for a very long time. "Sir," her aide said quietly, "we've confirmed the contents. It's definitely from Project Nightfall. The question is whether these farmers understand what they're really dealing with." Warren knew exactly what those documents contained. Formulas, test results, and evidence of human experimentation that could bring down governments and destroy careers. The diamonds had been payment to research scientists who'd agreed to keep quiet about what they'd witnessed. Jake's truck bounced along the gravel road, dust clouds obscuring the view behind them. But the black sedan wasn't their only concern. From the opposite direction, 2 motorcycles had appeared, their riders wearing dark helmets and moving fast. "Jake," Sam's voice was tight with fear. "This isn't about the money anymore, is it?" Before Jake could respond, his phone rang. The number was blocked, but something compelled him to answer. "Mr. Morrison," a woman's voice said calmly, "my name is Dr. Warren. You and your friend are in immediate danger. The items you found were part of a classified government project. There are people converging on your location who will kill you to retrieve them." Jake's blood turned to ice. "Who is this? How did you get this number?" "That's not important right now. What matters is that you trust me. Take the next left turn and head for the abandoned grain elevator on Porter Road. I have people there who can help you." The motorcycles were closing fast, and in his rearview mirror, Jake could see the black sedan gaining ground despite the rough terrain. The phone rang at exactly 3:47 a.m., jarring Sarah from a restless sleep. She'd been dreaming about men in dark suits circling their farmhouse like vultures. The caller ID showed Tom's number. "They're here." His voice was barely a whisper. 3 black SUVs just pulled up my driveway. "I'm in the barn loft." Sarah's blood turned to ice. Through her bedroom window, she could see headlights cutting through the darkness on the main road, moving slowly, deliberately. "We're getting company too." "Where's the package?" "Safe." "But Sarah, these aren't local cops. Military gear, night vision, professional." The line went dead. Sarah grabbed the emergency bag they'd packed and shook Jake awake. Her husband bolted upright, instantly alert, a remnant of his army days that had never left him. "Time to go," she whispered. They'd planned for this moment, hoping it would never come. The tunnels beneath their century-old farmhouse had once been part of the Underground Railroad. Tonight, they might save lives again. Jake led the way through the hidden panel behind their bedroom closet, down wooden steps worn smooth by generations of desperate feet. The narrow passage smelled of earth and old timber. Behind them, they heard the front door splinter. Federal agents, search warrant. Sarah almost laughed at the lie. Real federal agents didn't operate like this. They moved through the tunnel system Jake had mapped months ago when they first discovered the passages. The main route led to the old root cellar near the barn, but Jake took a different path, one that emerged in the abandoned Grayson property 1/2 mile away. 20 minutes later, they crouched in tall grass behind the ruins of a farmhouse that had burned down in the 1980s. From here, they could see their home illuminated by spotlights. Men in tactical gear moved with military precision, searching every room, every outbuilding. "They're not just looking," Jake observed grimly. "They're taking the place apart." Sarah watched strangers destroy everything she and Jake had built together. These men weren't interested in preserving evidence. They were eliminating it. Whatever they'd found in that tractor engine was worth killing for, worth erasing all traces of their discovery. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "We have your friend Tom. You have something that belongs to us. Fairfield Church. 1 hour. Come alone, or he dies." Jake read over her shoulder and cursed. It's a trap. Of course it's a trap. Sarah's mind raced through their limited options, but they have Tom, and they'll keep killing until they get what they want. What exactly do they want? We don't even know what we found. Sarah pulled out her phone and opened the photos she'd taken of the documents before hiding them. In the moonlight, they studied the pages again. Most of the text was in code, but some handwritten notes were in plain English. Names, dates, account numbers. "Look at this." She pointed to a signature at the bottom of one page. "General Morrison. Isn't he the one who was involved in that weapons scandal a few years ago?" Jake squinted at the faded ink. "The one who supposedly died in a car accident before he could testify? These documents are dated 3 days after his death. The implications hit them both simultaneously. They weren't just holding evidence of corruption, they had proof that a major government cover-up had been orchestrated. Someone had faked Morrison's death and hidden him away, along with documents that could topple careers and send people to prison. That's why they want this back so badly, Sarah realized. It's not just money, it's treason. A new sound caught their attention, helicopters approaching from the east. The search was expanding. "We can't run forever," Jake said, "and we can't let them kill Tom." Sarah made a decision that terrified her. "We're not running. We're going to that church, but not the way they expect." She opened her contacts and found Detective Rodriguez's number. Maria had always been straight with them, and right now they needed someone in law enforcement they could trust. The call went to voicemail. Sarah left a cryptic message. "Maria, it's Sarah Chen. Remember when you said to call if we ever found anything else interesting? We found something very interesting. Check your email in 10 minutes. She quickly typed an email, attaching photos of the most damning documents, and scheduled it to send automatically. Then she composed similar messages to 3 investigative journalists whose work she'd followed over the years. Insurance policy, she explained to Jake's questioning look. They had 45 minutes to reach the church, but first they needed weapons, transportation, and a plan that wouldn't get them all killed. As they prepared to leave their hiding spot, Sarah took one last look at their burning home. Everything they'd worked for was gone, but if they played this right, they might live to see justice served. The game was about to change. The abandoned grain silo stood like a concrete monument to better times, its weathered surface pocked with rust stains and decades of neglect. Jake pulled the truck behind the structure, hidden from the county road, while Sarah clutched the duffel bag containing their impossible treasure. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the cracked earth, and somewhere in the distance, a meadowlark's song carried on the wind, a sound that might have been peaceful under different circumstances. "Should give us time to think," Jake said, though his voice carried little conviction. They both knew thinking wouldn't solve their problem. The diamonds were real, the dead man in their barn was real, and the black sedan that had been prowling their property was undeniably real. Sarah climbed down from the truck, her legs unsteady. "Jake, what if we just took a few stones, enough to save the farm? We could put the rest back, pretend we never found them." Before Jake could answer, the distant rumble of an engine made them both freeze. Through a gap in the silo's concrete wall, they watched a dark SUV crawl along the road, moving too slowly to be casual traffic. The vehicle's windows were tinted black, and it seemed to pause at every farm gate, like a predator testing for weakness. "Too late for that," Jake whispered, pulling Sarah deeper into the silo's shadow. "They know we have something. Question is, how much do they know about what we found?" The SUV continued past their hiding spot, but the message was clear. They were being hunted systematically. Jake's mind raced through their options, each one seeming more desperate than the last. They couldn't go home, couldn't trust the local police, and apparently couldn't hide in plain sight either. Sarah unzipped the bag and stared at the glittering contents. "These aren't just diamonds, are they? They're too perfect, too uniform. And that serial number we saw etched on the container." She picked up one of the larger stones, holding it to the light. "This is someone's entire operation, millions of dollars worth." "More than that," Jake said grimly. "I've been thinking about what Tommy Morrison said at the auction. Remember? He mentioned the Kozlov family used to own our land before the bank foreclosed. What if this tractor wasn't abandoned by accident?" The pieces were starting to form a terrifying picture. The Kozlov name was whispered in certain circles, connected to money laundering, smuggling, and worse. If the family had hidden their assets in that tractor engine, expecting to retrieve them later, then Jake and Sarah hadn't just found treasure. They'd stumbled into the middle of a criminal empire's emergency fund. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text message. She read it and her face went pale. "It's from our neighbor, Mrs. Henderson. She says men in suits came by asking about us. They claim to be insurance investigators." Jake felt the walls closing in. "We need help, real help. Someone who understands what we're dealing with." "Oh, every cop for 50 miles knows us. But this is way bigger than anything they've handled, and if the wrong people find out we've gone to the authorities—" The sound of gravel crunching under tires cut through their conversation. Another vehicle was approaching, this one from the opposite direction. Jake peered around the silo's edge and saw a familiar pickup truck, red with a dented tailgate. "It's Billy Warren," he told Sarah, recognizing their old high school classmate who now worked as a mechanic in town. But relief quickly turned to suspicion. Billy never came out this way, and his timing seemed too convenient. The red pickup stopped near their hiding spot, and Billy climbed out slowly, his hands visible. "Jake? Sarah? I know you're here. Saw your truck tracks in the dirt." Jake stepped into view cautiously, keeping the silo between himself and the road. "What do you want, Billy?" "To help, if you'll let me." Billy's expression was serious, none of his usual easy grin. "Word's getting around town that you folks are in some kind of trouble. The kind that involves people asking questions with cash instead of badges. What's that supposed to mean?" "It means someone's been spreading money around, looking for information about you two, offering more than most folks around here see in a month." Billy glanced toward the road nervously. "Thing is, I might know something that could help. About that old tractor you bought, and about why certain people might want it back." Sarah emerged from behind Jake, still clutching the bag. "What do you know?" "My uncle used to work for the Kozlovs, back before they disappeared. Maintenance on their equipment, including some special modifications to engines. Hiding spots, you might say." Billy's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "He always said they'd be back for their property eventually. Guess eventually just arrived." The meadowlark's song had stopped, and the silence that replaced it felt ominous. In the distance, Jake could see dust clouds rising from the county road, more vehicles approaching, and this time they weren't alone. The abandoned gas station sat like a weathered tombstone against the grey morning sky, its broken windows staring blindly across the empty highway. Jake pulled the pickup behind the building, tires crunching on gravel and broken glass. The silence that followed felt heavier than the overcast clouds threatening rain above them. "This feels like a mistake," Sarah whispered, clutching the encrypted hard drive they'd pulled from the tractor engine. Her knuckles were white against the black metal casing. Marcus emerged from the passenger seat, scanning the desolate landscape. "Everything we've done lately feels like a mistake. Doesn't mean we stop moving forward." They'd driven through the night after the phone call from Elena Vasquez, the investigative journalist who claimed she could help them expose the truth about what they'd found. The meeting location she'd chosen was deliberately isolated, 30 miles from the nearest town, far from surveillance cameras and curious eyes. Jake checked his watch. 7 minutes early. He'd learned enough about staying alive in the past few days to know that arriving early meant you could scope out potential threats before exposing yourself. The lesson had come at the cost of watching his neighbor Tom bleed out on his kitchen floor. There, Sarah pointed to a dust cloud rising from the southern horizon. A single vehicle approached, moving neither too fast nor too slow. Professional. The car was a nondescript sedan, the kind that could blend into any parking lot in America. It pulled up beside the gas station's front entrance, and a woman stepped out. Elena Vasquez was younger than her voice had suggested over the phone, maybe 40, with prematurely grey hair and the kind of alert posture that came from years of looking over shoulders. She walked toward them with deliberate confidence, her hands visible and empty. Jake appreciated the gesture. It suggested someone who understood the paranoia that came with their situation. "You're braver than most people in your position," Elena said by way of greeting. "Or more desperate." "Both," Marcus replied. "You said you could help us understand what we're dealing with." Elena nodded toward the hard drive in Sarah's grip. "May I?" Sarah hesitated, then handed it over. Elena produced a tablet from her jacket and connected the drive through what appeared to be several security adapters. "The encryption is military grade," she murmured, fingers dancing across the screen. "But I've seen this particular algorithm before. NSA variant, probably from their cyber operations division." She looked up sharply. "Where exactly did you find this?" Jake exchanged glances with his siblings. They'd agreed to tell her everything, but saying it out loud still felt surreal. Inside the engine block of a 1972 John Deere tractor. Elena's eyebrows rose. "That's specific and bizarre." She returned her attention to the tablet. "The modification date on these files is from 6 months ago, but the original creation timestamps go back 15 years. The screen filled with documents, photographs, and what appeared to be financial records. Elena scrolled through them rapidly, her expression growing increasingly grim. "This is worse than I thought," she said finally. "These files document a black operations program called Nightshade. It was supposed to have been terminated after a congressional investigation in 2019. "Supposed to have been?" Sarah asked. "According to this, it never stopped. Someone buried it deeper and kept it running." Elena turned the tablet so they could see a photograph of a man in a military uniform. Colonel James Morrison, formerly of Army Intelligence. He was the program director before it was officially shut down. Jake felt ice forming in his stomach. The name was familiar. He'd seen it in local newspapers over the years. Morrison owns half the county. Agricultural development, they call it. "That's his cover," Elena confirmed. Nightshade was designed to eliminate threats to national security through untraceable methods. Assassinations disguised as accidents, poisonings that looked like natural deaths, disappearances that appeared to be voluntary departures. Marcus stepped closer to the screen. "How does this connect to our tractor?" Elena pulled up another document. Someone was trying to get this information out. "See this email thread? An insider was planning to expose the program's continued operations. The last message is dated the day before a local mechanic named Eddie Torrance died in what was reported as an accident." Sarah gasped. "Eddie sold us the tractor. He said it came from an estate sale, that the previous owner died suddenly." "Not suddenly," Elena corrected. "He was murdered. And Eddie must have discovered something when he was preparing the tractor for sale, smart enough to hide the evidence, not smart enough to keep his mouth shut about it." A new sound reached their ears, the distant rumble of multiple engines approaching from the north. Elena immediately began disconnecting the hard drive, her movements sharp with urgency. "We need to leave, now." She handed the drive back to Sarah. "They found us faster than I expected." 3 black SUVs crested the hill, moving with the aggressive precision of a military convoy. Jake was already running toward their pickup, his siblings close behind. Elena sprinted for her sedan, The first shots shattered the morning silence as the SUVs closed the distance. The abandoned grain silo stood like a concrete monument against the starless sky, its cylindrical form casting long shadows across the overgrown field. Jake pulled the truck behind a cluster of dying oak trees, killing the engine but leaving the keys dangling in the ignition. Sarah clutched the metal briefcase containing the microfilm so tightly her knuckles had gone white. "You sure about this place?" she whispered, scanning the desolate landscape that stretched endlessly in every direction. Jake nodded toward the silo. "My grandfather used to store equipment here during the Depression. There's a maintenance tunnel that runs underneath, connects to the old railway system. If things go sideways, we can disappear underground." They climbed out of the truck, boots crunching on frost-covered weeds. The November air bit at their faces as they approached the structure. Jake had chosen this location carefully, far enough from town to avoid curious eyes, but close enough to civilization that they could reach help if needed. The irony wasn't lost on him that they were hiding stolen government secrets in a place his family had once used to hide from government agents during Prohibition. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text message. "Morrison's coming alone. Says he'll be here in 20 minutes. And you trust him?" She hesitated. "I trust him more than I trust staying on the run forever." Jake pulled open the heavy metal door that led into the silo's base. The hinges screamed in protest, echoing across the empty fields. Inside, the air smelled of rust and decades of accumulated dust. He clicked on a flashlight, its beam revealing a maze of old conveyor equipment and forgotten farming machinery. "Over here." He led her to a narrow staircase that descended into the building's foundation. "The tunnel entrance is down there." They settled into the darkness to wait, Sarah keeping watch through a crack in the door while Jake positioned himself near the tunnel opening. The briefcase sat between them like a ticking bomb. "Tell me something," Sarah said, her voice barely audible. "If we give Morrison this film, what's to stop Senator Blackwood from sending more people after us? We're the only witnesses to what happened at your farm." Jake had been wrestling with the same question. Morrison seemed to think the film would be enough to bring Blackwood down. Public exposure, congressional hearings. Politicians have survived worse scandals. A pair of headlights swept across the field outside, growing brighter as they approached. Sarah peered through the crack, her body tensing. "It's Morrison, alone, like he promised." They watched as the federal agent climbed out of a dark sedan, adjusting his coat against the cold. He carried a leather portfolio and moved with the careful precision of someone who'd done this before. Jake noticed Morrison kept checking his surroundings, professional paranoia evident in every step. "Let's get this over with," Jake muttered. They emerged from the silo as Morrison reached the entrance. In the stark illumination of the car's headlights, the agent looked older than Jake remembered, his face drawn with exhaustion and stress. "You have it?" Morrison asked without preamble. Sarah held up the briefcase. "Everything's here. Names, dates, financial records, enough to prove Blackwood's been selling weapons technology to foreign buyers for the past 5 years. Morrison's eyes fixed on the case with an intensity that made Jake's stomach clench. Something felt wrong. The agent's posture was too rigid, his movements too calculated. "Before we hand this over," Jake said slowly, "tell us exactly what happens next. How do you guarantee our safety?" Morrison's hand moved almost imperceptibly toward his coat. "You don't need to worry about safety anymore." The words hit Jake like ice water. In that instant, he understood they'd made a catastrophic mistake. Morrison wasn't here to help them. He was here to silence them. "Sarah, run." Jake lunged forward as Morrison's hand emerged from his coat, gripping a pistol. They collided in a tangle of limbs, the guns skittering across the frozen ground. Sarah scrambled backward, clutching the briefcase as the two men wrestled in the dirt. Morrison was smaller but trained, using Jake's momentum against him. An elbow caught Jake in the ribs, driving the air from his lungs. He rolled away gasping as Morrison dove for the fallen weapon. "The tunnel!" Jake shouted. Sarah was already moving, disappearing through the silo door with the briefcase. Jake followed, Morrison's footsteps pounding behind them. They reached the staircase. As the first gunshot echoed through the concrete chamber, the bullet sparking off metal pipes inches from Jake's head. They plunged into the maintenance tunnel, Sarah's phone providing the only light. The passage was narrow and damp, barely wide enough for one person. Behind them, Morrison's voice carried through the darkness. "You can't run forever. Blackwood has people everywhere. FBI, local police, even your precious Senator Walsh. There's nowhere left to hide." Jake grabbed Sarah's hand, pulling her deeper into the tunnel system that had once helped bootleggers evade federal agents. History, it seemed, had a twisted sense of humor. The safe house felt like a tomb. Maria paced the small kitchen while Jake sat hunched over his laptop, the blue glow reflecting off his exhausted face. Through the grimy windows, dawn was breaking over the industrial district where Agent Reynolds had stashed them 3 days ago. "Anything?" Maria asked, though she knew the answer from Jake's slumped shoulders. "Dead ends everywhere." He rubbed his eyes. "Every lead about Meridian Industries hits a wall. Shell companies, offshore accounts, government contracts with half the pages redacted. It's like they don't exist and run everything at the same time." Maria's phone buzzed. Another blocked number. She'd stopped answering after the first dozen calls, each one a different voice making the same offer: return what they'd found for $50 million and their lives. The amounts kept climbing, but so did the desperation in the voices. "We should have taken the money," she whispered, not for the first time. Jake looked up sharply. "And trusted they'd let us walk away? After what we've seen?" What they'd seen. Maria's stomach churned, remembering the photos Agent Reynolds had shown them. 12 other discoveries over the past 20 years. Farmers who'd found similar devices, hikers who'd stumbled across them in remote locations, construction workers who dug them up, all dead within weeks, their deaths ruled accidents or suicides. The Hartley family in Montana, Reynolds had explained, spreading the crime scene photos across the table. Found one in their well in 2019. House fire 3 weeks later, parents and 2 kids. Another photo. Jimmy Volkov, construction foreman in Seattle, found one in a foundation dig. Fell off a bridge 2 days after he reported it. The pattern was always the same. Discovery, brief investigation, then sudden, violent death. The devices would disappear, the cases would go cold, and life would continue as if nothing had happened. Except this time was different. This time, Jake and Maria had stumbled onto something bigger than just one device hidden in an engine. The serial numbers Jake had photographed before their escape had led Reynolds' team to a revelation that changed everything. "They're not hiding something that happened," Reynolds had told them yesterday. "They're hiding something that's happening right now." The devices weren't relics from some Cold War experiment. They were active, collecting data, part of a network that stretched across the country. Environmental readings, population tracking, communication intercepts. A surveillance system so vast and illegal that its exposure would topple governments and destroy corporations. Jake's laptop chimed with an encrypted message. His face went pale as he read it. "What?" Maria demanded. "Reynolds. He says we need to move. Now, what happened?" Jake was already slamming the laptop shut. "They found us." The sound of engines outside made Maria's blood freeze. Black SUVs were pulling up in front of the warehouse, their windows tinted so dark they looked like holes in the morning light. Back exit. Jake grabbed the emergency bag Reynolds had prepared for them. "Move." They ran through the narrow hallway, Maria's heart hammering against her ribs. Behind them, she heard the front door explode inward. Heavy footsteps echoed through the building. The back door opened onto an alley filled with dumpsters and broken glass. Jake grabbed her hand and they sprinted toward the street, but more vehicles appeared at both ends of the alley, boxing them in. "This way." Jake pulled her toward a rusted fire escape hanging from the building's side. The metal groaned under their weight as they climbed, but it held. Shouts erupted below them. Maria heard the sharp crack of gunfire and saw sparks fly off the fire escape's railing. They weren't trying to capture anymore. The rooftop was a maze of ventilation units and satellite dishes. They ran across the gravel surface, jumping between buildings, the morning sky stretching endlessly above them. Behind them, more men emerged onto the roof, their black tactical gear making them look like insects against the pale concrete. There, Jake pointed to a maintenance shed at the far end of the building. Reynolds said, "If everything went wrong, look for the blue shed." They reached it as bullets whined overhead. Jake yanked open the door to reveal Agent Reynolds crouched inside, a radio in one hand and a pistol in the other. "About time," he said grimly. "We've got maybe 2 minutes before they surround this building." "How did they find us?" Maria gasped. "Leak in the bureau. Higher up than I thought." Reynolds handed them each a pistol. "Change of plans. We're not hiding anymore. We're going public." Jake stared at the weapon in his hands. "What do you mean?" "I mean, we're driving straight to the nearest news station and telling the world everything. It's the only way to keep you alive." Reynolds checked his clip. "Once this story breaks, killing you becomes pointless." The sound of helicopters filled the air above them. "Ready?" Reynolds asked. Maria looked at Jake, seeing her own terror reflected in his eyes. They'd wanted a simple life, free from debt and worry. Instead, they'd found themselves at the center of something that could reshape the world. "Ready," she said. The abandoned grain silo loomed against the star-scattered sky like a concrete monument to forgotten prosperity. Jake pressed his back against the cold metal of their stolen pickup truck, straining to hear any sound that might betray movement in the darkness beyond. Beside him, Marcus clutched the briefcase containing the microfilm, his knuckles white in the moonlight. "You sure about this place?" Marcus whispered, his breath forming small clouds in the frigid air. Jake nodded toward the silo. "My grandfather used to store equipment here during the Depression. There's a tunnel system underneath, connects to 3 different exit points. If things go sideways, we've got options." They'd been driving for 6 hours since escaping the warehouse shootout, taking back roads and switching vehicles twice. The radio had been silent about their encounter with Volkov's men, which somehow made Jake more nervous than if it had been front-page news. Powerful people had ways of making problems disappear completely. Sarah emerged from the shadows near the silo's base, having completed her reconnaissance. "It's clean," she reported quietly. "No fresh tire tracks, no signs of surveillance. But we shouldn't stay long." The 3 of them had spent the drive piecing together what they knew. The microfilm contained more than just evidence of the chemical weapons program. It held detailed records of a network spanning decades, government officials, defense contractors, foreign buyers, names, dates, financial transactions. It was a roadmap to one of the largest illegal arms operations in American history. "My father wasn't just a whistleblower," Sarah had explained, as they'd navigated the dark highways. "He was the operations chief chemist. He helped develop the compounds, then realized what they were really being used for. The accident at the lab wasn't an accident. He sabotaged his own research to prevent a massive sale to overseas buyers." Now, standing in the shadow of the grain silo, Jake felt the weight of that knowledge pressing down on them. They weren't just running from criminals anymore. They were running from a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of power. Marcus opened the briefcase and carefully extracted one of the microfilm reels. "We need to make copies, lots of them. Send them everywhere. News outlets, foreign governments, congressional oversight committees. Make this too big to suppress." "Where?" Jake asked. "Every move we make, they seem to be one step ahead." Sarah pulled out a cell phone. Not one of their regular devices, but a prepaid model she'd picked up at their last gas station stop. "I have contacts. Journalists who've been investigating defense contractor corruption for years. They'll know what to do with this." As she began dialing, Jake heard the distant sound of an engine. His blood turned to ice as he recognized the deep rumble of a heavy truck, or multiple trucks, approaching from the east. The sound was still far off, but growing closer. "Company," he hissed. Sarah ended her call before it could connect. Marcus snapped the briefcase shut. Without discussion, they moved toward the silo's entrance, a rusted door hanging askew on corroded hinges. Inside, their flashlight beams revealed a cavernous space filled with the detritus of abandoned agriculture. Ancient grain chutes hung from the ceiling like skeletal fingers, and the floor was littered with rotting wood and metal debris. Jake led them to a corner where a section of concrete had partially collapsed, revealing a narrow opening that descended into darkness. "The old drainage system," he explained as they squeezed through the gap, "runs under most of the farmland around here." The tunnel was cramped and reeked of stagnant water, but it was better than facing whatever was approaching above ground. They moved single file through the concrete passage, their flashlights casting dancing shadows on the slime-covered walls. Behind them, Jake could hear the muffled sounds of vehicles arriving at the silo. Car doors slamming, voices shouting orders, the scrape of metal as the entrance door was forced fully open. "Faster," he urged, though the tunnel barely allowed them to move at more than a crawl. After what felt like an eternity, they reached a junction where the main tunnel branched into 3 smaller passages. Jake chose the middle route, which he remembered led to an outlet near an old farmhouse about a mile away. As they emerged from the tunnel through a culvert hidden among tall weeds, Sarah's phone buzzed with a text message. She checked it quickly, then grabbed Jake's arm. "My contact got back to me," she whispered urgently. "There's a safe house, a place where investigative journalists go when they're working on dangerous stories. It's off the grid, protected." "Where?" Marcus asked. "Canada. 2 hours north of here." Jake looked back toward the grain silo, where he could see the sweep of powerful searchlights cutting through the darkness. They were running out of time, running out of options, and running out of places to hide. But they still had the microfilm, and as long as they had that, they had a chance to expose the truth, if they could survive long enough to tell it. The abandoned grain elevator loomed against the pre-dawn sky like a skeletal monument to better times. Sarah checked her watch, 4:47 a.m. Marcus should have been here by now with the evidence they'd salvaged from the farmhouse before Kellerman's men torched it. The encrypted hard drive containing Professor Chen's research files felt heavy in her jacket pocket, but it was their only bargaining chip now. A low whistle echoed from the shadows near the loading dock. Sarah recognized Marcus's signal and made her way through the tall weeds, her boots crunching on broken glass and scattered grain. She found him crouched behind a rusted conveyor belt, his face grim in the pale moonlight. "We've got problems," he whispered. "Jake's been taken." Sarah's blood turned cold. "When? Where?" 2 hours ago. They hit the motel hard, professional job. Mrs. Patterson from next door saw black SUVs, men in tactical gear. Marcus pulled out his phone, showing her a message. This came 20 minutes later. The text was simple and chilling. "You have something we want. Pier 19, dawn. Come alone or the boy dies." "It's a trap," Sarah said, though they both knew they had no choice. "Of course it is. But Jake's just a kid who stumbled into this mess because his family needed money." Marcus ejected the magazine from his pistol, checking his ammunition. "Chen's research is worth billions to the right pharmaceutical companies. Those compounds hidden in that old tractor engine, they're not just rare, they're extinct. Fossilized bacterial cultures from the Permian era that somehow survived in a perfect preservation matrix." Sarah nodded grimly. She'd read enough of Chen's files to understand the implications. The professor had discovered bacterial compounds that could revolutionize antibiotic treatment, potentially saving millions of lives. But Kellerman's consortium wanted to suppress the research, maintaining their stranglehold on existing drug patents worth hundreds of billions. "There's something else," Marcus continued. "I decrypted more of Chen's files. He didn't die in that lab accident 5 years ago. He was murdered, the same day he tried to go public with his discoveries about the bacterial cultures. Kellerman's been cleaning up loose ends ever since. The pieces clicked into place. That's why they've been so desperate to recover everything. It's not just about the money, it's about murder. If this gets out, 6 executives go down for conspiracy and homicide." Marcus stood, shouldering his pack. "The pier is a killing ground. Open water, isolated, easy to dispose of bodies. They'll take the drive and eliminate all of us. Unless we change the game. Sarah pulled out her satellite phone. I uploaded copies of everything to a secure server 3 hours ago. If we don't check in every 12 hours, the files automatically get sent to the FBI, CDC, and every major news outlet. You think they'll believe us? They will when I tell them about the dead drop. Sarah allowed herself a small smile. While you were getting Jake to safety before he was taken, I had him hide a backup drive somewhere only he knows. That boy's smarter than we gave him credit for. They made their way toward the waterfront, keeping to the shadows between abandoned warehouses. The air smelled of rust and dead fish, and fog was rolling in from the lake, reducing visibility to mere yards. Perfect cover, but it worked both ways. As they approached Pier 19, Marcus grabbed Sarah's arm. Vehicle lights, 2 o'clock, at least 3 cars. Through the fog, they could make out the shapes of black SUVs arranged in a semicircle. Figures moved between them. Too many to count accurately, but clearly more than Marcus and Sarah could handle in a straight fight. There, Sarah pointed. A lone figure sat on a crate near the end of the pier. Even at this distance, they could see it was Jake, his hands bound behind his back. Kellerman's not taking any chances, Marcus muttered. But he's made one mistake. He assumes we're here to make a trade. Aren't we? Marcus smiled grimly, pulling a modified flare gun from his pack. Remember that favor I mentioned? My old unit has been tracking Kellerman's operation for months. Turns out, the government takes a dim view of corporations murdering federal researchers and suppressing medical breakthroughs that could save soldiers' lives. In the distance, barely audible over the lapping waves, came the rhythmic thump of helicopter rotors. Delta Force? Sarah asked. Better. FBI hostage rescue team with a very personal interest in taking down everyone involved in Professor Chen's murder. Marcus checked his watch. We just need to keep everyone alive for 6 more minutes. A spotlight suddenly blazed to life, pinning them in its harsh glare. Kellerman's voice boomed across the water through a megaphone. Dr. Sarah Chen and Mr. Williams. Step forward slowly, hands visible. You have something that belongs to us. Sarah stepped into the light, the hard drive held high above her head. Behind the glare, she could see armed figures moving into position. Jake looked up at the sound of her name, hope flickering across his young face. The helicopters were getting closer. The abandoned grain silo stood like a concrete sentinel against the pre-dawn sky, its cylindrical form barely visible in the darkness that still cloaked the Nebraska countryside. Sarah Chen crouched behind a rusted piece of farming equipment, her heart hammering as she watched Marcus Hayes emerge from a black sedan 50 yards away. Even in the dim light, she could see the military precision in his movements, the way his hand rested near his jacket. 3 days had passed since the explosion at the Kowalski farm, 3 days since everything had gone to hell. The package they'd found in that tractor engine, containing what appeared to be classified documents about illegal arms deals and government cover-ups, had already claimed too many lives. But Sarah wasn't running anymore. She pressed the record button on her phone and slipped it into her breast pocket, the lens barely visible through a carefully torn hole in the fabric. Whatever Hayes was planning to do here, she intended to capture every second. The silo's metal door creaked open, and Jake Kowalski stepped out, his hands raised slightly. Sarah's breath caught. She'd thought Jake was dead, had seen his farmhouse consumed by flames after Hayes's men had arrived. Yet here he was, alive but clearly terrified. "You have something that belongs to my employers," Hayes called out, his voice carrying across the empty field. "I told you on the phone," Jake replied, his voice shaking but defiant. "I don't have the originals anymore. They're already in safe hands." Hayes laughed, a sound devoid of warmth. "Mr. Kowalski, do you really think we'd let you walk away after what you've seen? After what you know?" Sarah adjusted her position, trying to get a clearer view. Her investigation into the Prometheus group had led her here, following a trail of shell companies and buried congressional testimonies. The The documents Jake had found weren't just evidence of arms dealing. They were proof of a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of government. "The files are already uploaded," Jake said, standing straighter. "If anything happens to me, they go public automatically." "Impressive," Hayes said, stepping closer. "But you're forgetting something. We have resources you can't imagine. Dead man switches can be hacked. Cloud servers can be erased. People can be discredited posthumously." Two more figures emerged from the shadows behind the silo, Hayes's operatives, moving to flank Jake. Sarah recognized the taller one from the security footage she'd obtained from the bank where Jake had tried to deposit the documents. They'd been tracking him for days. Jake's hand moved toward his pocket, and instantly all three men drew weapons. Slowly, Hayes warned. Jake pulled out a USB drive, holding it up in the pale moonlight. "This is what you want, isn't it? The only copy left?" Sarah zoomed her phone's camera, making sure to capture the exchange. But something felt wrong. Jake seemed too calm, too prepared. This didn't feel like a man about to die. It felt like a man with a plan. "Toss it over," Hayes commanded. Instead of complying, Jake smiled grimly. "You know what I learned about you and your Prometheus group? You're not half as smart as you think you are." The USB drive sailed through the air, but not toward Hayes. Jake had thrown it high and far, and as it arced through the darkness, Sarah heard a soft beeping sound. "Get down!" someone shouted. The explosion wasn't large, but in the confined space between the silo and the surrounding equipment, it was devastating. Sarah threw herself flat as shrapnel whistled overhead, her ears ringing from the blast. When the debris stopped falling, she raised her head to see Hayes's men scattered, one clearly injured. Jake was already moving, sprinting toward a motorcycle hidden behind the silo. But Hayes, despite being knocked down, still had his weapon. Sarah didn't think. She stood up and shouted, "Federal agent, drop your weapons!" It was a lie, but in the chaos and darkness, it bought Jake precious seconds. Hayes spun toward her, his gun tracking, but Jake's motorcycle roared to life, drawing his attention back. The drive was empty, Jake called out over the engine noise. "Everything's already been transmitted to WikiLeaks, the Washington Post, and the FBI. It's over, Hayes." The motorcycle kicked up gravel as Jake accelerated toward the access road. Hayes raised his weapon, but Sarah was already running toward him, knowing she couldn't let him take that shot. She tackled him from the side just as he fired, the bullet going wide. They hit the ground hard, Hayes's greater strength immediately apparent as he threw her off. But the delay had been enough. Jake's taillights were already disappearing into the distance. Hayes stood slowly, pointing his gun at Sarah's chest. "Miss Chen, I presume. You've caused us considerable trouble." Sarah looked up at him, her phone still recording in her pocket. "Not nearly as much trouble as those documents are going to cause you." In the distance, she could hear sirens approaching. Jake had kept his word. The cavalry was coming. Hayes heard them too, and his expression shifted from confident to calculating. "This isn't over," he said, backing toward his sedan. The abandoned grain elevator loomed against the dawn sky like a concrete monument to dead dreams. Sarah pulled the truck behind a collapsed barn, its rusted siding providing perfect camouflage. The package containing the prototype sat heavy in Jack's lap, wrapped in an old tarp that smelled of motor oil and secrets. "You sure about this contact of yours?" Jack whispered, though they were miles from civilization. Sarah checked her phone again. "Marcus Chen, investigative journalist for the Washington Herald. He's broken 3 major corruption stories in the past 2 years. If anyone can get this out without getting us killed, it's him." A black sedan approached from the opposite direction, dust trailing behind it like a warning flag. Sarah's hand instinctively moved to the gun tucked in her waistband, a habit she'd developed since their world turned upside down. The sedan stopped 50 yards away. A lean Asian man in his 30s stepped out, wearing jeans and a wrinkled button-down that suggested he'd driven through the night. He approached with his hands visible, a gesture Sarah appreciated. "Sarah Hendricks?" His voice carried the careful neutrality of someone who'd interviewed both saints and criminals. "That's me," You came alone? As promised. Chen glanced around the desolate landscape. Though I have to say, your story sounded crazy enough that I almost brought a photographer. Glad I didn't. Jack climbed out of the truck, the package in his arms. Crazy doesn't begin to cover it. Chen's eyes fixed on the bundle. That's it? The thing that's got Morrison Industries turning over every rock in 3 states? Among others. Sarah kept watching the horizon. Before we show you anything, I need guarantees. Full anonymity until we say otherwise. And you run this story past no one. Not editors, not fact-checkers, nobody. Until it's ready to publish. That's not how journalism works. It is now. Jack's voice carried the edge of a man who'd seen too much death. Because the alternative is we disappear, you disappear, and this thing goes back to the people who've already killed to keep it secret. Chen studied their faces, reading the fear and determination etched there. All right, show me. Jack unwrapped the device with the reverence of a museum curator. Even in the pale morning light, the crystalline matrices caught and bent the rays into impossible colors. The metal housing bore scorch marks from its violent extraction, but the technology inside remained intact. Jesus Christ! Chen stepped closer, pulling out his phone to record. What exactly am I looking at? Energy storage beyond anything publicly available, Sarah said. This one device could power a small town for months, maybe longer. We're farmers, not scientists, Jack added. But we've done enough research to know this represents a quantum leap in battery technology, the kind that could revolutionize everything from cars to power grids. Chen circled the device, his journalistic instincts overriding his shock. Where did it come from? That's where it gets complicated. Sarah pulled out a folder containing copies of everything they'd discovered. Morrison Industries has been developing this in secret for at least 5 years. Government contracts, military applications, the works, but they've been deliberately keeping it off the market. Why would they sit on technology like this? Because they're not the only ones involved. Jack pointed to specific documents in the folder. Oil companies, traditional energy suppliers, automotive manufacturers, they're all part of a consortium that's been suppressing clean energy advances. Chen flipped through the papers, his expression growing darker with each page. This implicates hundreds of people, billions in profits. And that's just what we found in one hidden facility. Sarah's voice carried the weight of terrible knowledge. We think there are others, different technologies, all being buried to protect existing industries. A distant rumble made them all freeze. Sarah squinted at the horizon where a helicopter was moving in their direction. Time to go. She started rewrapping the device. Can you run with this? Chen was already heading for his car. Hell yes. But I need more than documents. Sources, witnesses, technical analysis. We'll get you what we can. Jack carried the package back to their truck. But right now, staying alive takes priority. The helicopter was definitely coming toward them, still several miles out but closing fast. Chen's sedan kicked up gravel as he accelerated away, taking a different route back to the main highway. Sarah gunned the truck engine, her mind already planning their next move. They'd bought themselves time, maybe even salvation, but the game was far from over. The consortium wouldn't give up easily, not with trillions at stake. You think he'll actually publish it? Jack asked, watching Chen's car disappear. He'd better. Sarah navigated around potholes that could swallow a tire, because we're running out of cards to play. The helicopter's sound grew louder, a mechanical heartbeat counting down the seconds until their hiding place became a trap. The safe house felt like a tomb in the pre-dawn darkness. Sarah pressed her face against the reinforced window, watching the empty street below while Marcus paced behind her like a caged animal. They'd been hiding for 6 hours since Elena's frantic call, and the waiting was eating them alive. We should run, Marcus said for the 3rd time. Pack everything and disappear. Costa Rica maybe, or somewhere without extradition treaties. Sarah turned from the window. And leave Elena to die? Jake's already gone because we trusted the wrong person. I won't lose anyone else. The encrypted phone buzzed. Sarah snatched it up, her heart hammering. "They have me." Elena's voice was barely a whisper. "Warehouse District, Pier 47. They want the real diamonds, not the copies." The line went dead. Marcus grabbed Sarah's arm. "It's a trap. Has to be." "Of course it's a trap." Sarah was already moving, stuffing weapons into a duffel bag. "But Elena saved our lives. We owe her. We owe her nothing if we're dead." Sarah stopped packing and fixed him with a stare that could cut glass. "Then stay here. I'm going alone." Marcus cursed under his breath, then started loading ammunition clips. 40 years of marriage, and you still make the worst decisions at the worst times. They drove through the industrial district in stolen silence, past shuttered factories and rusted shipping containers. The harbor smell of brine and diesel fuel crept through the truck's vents. Sarah checked her pistol for the 5th time, while Marcus studied the warehouse blueprints Elena had given them weeks ago. 3 entrances, he muttered. Loading dock, side door, roof access. They'll expect us to come in quiet through the side. So we go loud through the front? We go smart. Marcus folded the blueprint. You create a distraction at the loading dock. I'll circle around and come through the roof. Give me 10 minutes, then start shooting. Sarah nodded, though her stomach churned with acid. Everything about this felt wrong, but Elena's terrified voice kept echoing in her head. The woman had risked everything to help them decode the diamond's location data, had lost her own cover in the process. The warehouse loomed against the grey sky like a concrete beast. Sarah crouched behind a shipping container, watching shadows move past the high windows. At least 6 figures, maybe more. Professional movements, military precision. These weren't Kozlov's usual thugs. Her watch showed 10 minutes had passed. Time to move. Sarah pulled the pin from a flashbang grenade and hurled it through the loading dock's window. The explosion lit up the warehouse interior like a white-hot sun, followed by shouts and the clatter of automatic weapons. She rolled through the shattered window as gunfire erupted around her, muzzle flashes strobing in the smoke-filled darkness. A bullet whined past her ear as she dove behind a forklift, splinters of concrete stinging her face. "Sarah Chen!" The voice boomed across the warehouse with a slight Russian accent. "You have caused considerable trouble." Viktor Kozlov stepped into a pool of overhead light, his expensive suit somehow immaculate despite the chaos. Elena knelt beside him, blood trickling from her nose, hands zip-tied behind her back. 2 armed men flanked them, while others fanned out through the maze of shipping containers. "The diamonds, Mrs. Chen, the real ones, in exchange for your friend's life." "I don't have them," Sarah called back, trying to spot Marcus in the shadows above. "They're in a safety deposit box across town." Kozlov's laugh was cold as Arctic wind. "You misunderstand. I know exactly where they are. In fact, I know many things you do not." He nodded to one of his men, who dragged a second figure into the light. Sarah's blood turned to ice. Jake stumbled forward, alive but battered, a gun pressed to his temple. His clothes were torn and stained with dried blood, but his eyes were alert and furious. "Surprise," Kozlov said. "Your husband has been my guest for the past 3 days. Very chatty once we applied the proper motivation." The warehouse spun around Sarah. Jake was supposed to be dead. She'd seen him fall, seen the blood, had spent days grieving, planning revenge, accepting that the man she'd loved for 4 decades was gone. "Now," Kozlov continued, "you will retrieve the diamonds and bring them here. You have 2 hours. If you attempt to contact authorities, if you try to run, if you do anything other than exactly what I have instructed, I will kill them both, very slowly." A rope dropped from the skylight as Marcus descended like an avenging angel, assault rifle blazing. Kozlov's men scattered, returning fire as the warehouse erupted into a war zone. But Sarah barely noticed the gunfight raging around her. Her entire world had narrowed to Jake's face, to the impossible reality that he was alive, and to the growing certainty that nothing, not Kozlov, not the diamonds, not even death itself, would stop her from getting him back. The warehouse floor felt like ice beneath Sarah's cheek as consciousness slowly returned. Her head throbbed where Kovac had struck her, and the metallic taste of blood filled her mouth. Through blurred vision, she could make out Tom and Jake bound to chairs nearby, both still unconscious. Finally awake, Kovac's voice carried across the empty space. He stood near a workbench, carefully examining the diamond-studded cylinder they'd pulled from the old John Deere. "You have no idea what you stumbled upon, do you?" Sarah struggled against the ropes binding her wrists, trying to keep her movements minimal. Behind Kovac, two of his men flanked the exits, while a third monitored police scanners. The abandoned grain elevator on the outskirts of Cedar Falls had been the perfect location, isolated, forgotten, and far from Detective Morrison's search radius. "The Kessler collection," Kovac continued, his accent thick with satisfaction. "My grandfather spent 3 years stealing these pieces from Jewish families in Prague. Art, jewelry, religious artifacts, all of it disappeared into Nazi vaults. When the war ended and the Americans came, he hid the most valuable pieces and fled." Tom stirred in his chair, groaning as he came to. Blood had dried on his temple, and his left eye was swollen shut. "Sarah," he whispered. "I'm here," she managed, her throat raw. Kovac turned toward them, his pale eyes reflecting the harsh fluorescent lighting. "For 75 years, my family searched for these items. We knew they were hidden somewhere in the American Midwest, but the records were incomplete. Your farm, Mr. Bradley, was purchased by my grandfather in 1947 under a false name. He buried his treasures and planned to return after the heat died down." Jake's head lolled forward as he regained consciousness, immediately testing his bonds. The rope around his wrists was tight, but Sarah noticed he was working his thumb against the knots with practiced precision, a skill learned from years of farm work. "But he never came back," Sarah said, trying to keep Kovac talking while Jake worked. "He died, didn't he? Heart attack in Buenos Aires, 1953. The location died with him." Kovac lifted the cylinder, and diamonds caught the light like captured stars. "We spent decades following paper trails, interviewing elderly immigrants, even hiring archaeologists. Nothing. Then your little discovery made the news." The scanner crackled with police chatter. Morrison's voice cut through the static. "All units. Suspects may be hiding in industrial district. Check warehouses and abandoned buildings." One of Kovac's men shifted nervously. "Boss, maybe we should move." "Not yet." Kovac opened a black duffel bag and began placing the cylinder inside, alongside other items Sarah recognized from their barn hiding spot. "First, we finish this properly." Sarah's heart sank as she realized they'd found everything. Weeks of careful planning, of staying one step ahead, had crumbled in a single afternoon. But Jake had freed one hand and was working on the rope around his torso. "You're making a mistake," Tom said, his voice stronger now despite his injuries. "This stuff belongs in museums. Those families you mentioned, their descendants deserve to know what happened to their heritage." Kovac laughed, a sound devoid of warmth. "Spare me the moral lecture. My grandfather risked everything for these pieces. By right of conquest, they belong to my family." "By right of theft, you mean," Sarah snapped. The backhand came without warning, snapping her head sideways. Stars exploded across her vision, but through the pain, she saw Jake's chair rock slightly. He was almost free. "Enough talk." Kovac nodded to his nearest man. "Kill them. Make it look like a robbery gone wrong." The gunman stepped forward, weapon raised, just as Jake erupted from his chair. Years of throwing hay bales and wrestling cattle had given him explosive strength. He caught the shooter in a tackle that sent them both crashing into the workbench. "Move!" Jake shouted as he grappled for the gun. Sarah rolled toward Tom's chair, using her shoulder to knock him over and away from the second gunman's line of fire. Gunshots echoed through the warehouse, deafeningly loud in the enclosed space. Jake and the first shooter struggled on the ground, while Kovac shouted orders in what sounded like Czech. The third man abandoned his scanner post to join the fight, but Jake had gained control of the weapon. 2 quick shots dropped both attackers before they could reach him. Kovac backed toward the exit, the duffel bag clutched against his chest. "This isn't over. My people will never stop looking." But sirens were growing louder outside, and Detective Morrison's voice boomed through a bullhorn. "Building is surrounded. Exit with your hands visible." For a moment, Kovac's cold composure cracked. Then his hand moved toward a concealed weapon, and Jake didn't hesitate. The final gunshot silenced the warehouse except for the approaching sirens and Sarah's ragged breathing. As Jake worked to free them from their bonds, Sarah stared at the scattered diamonds glittering across the concrete floor like fallen stars, each one representing a stolen life, a destroyed family, a hidden truth finally brought to light. The abandoned grain silo loomed against the starless sky, like a concrete monument to forgotten dreams. Jake pressed his back against the cold metal of their stolen truck, listening to the distant rumble of approaching vehicles. Sarah crouched beside him, clutching the modified flash drive that contained the only remaining copy of the Prometheus files, the genetic research data that had turned their simple lives into a nightmare. "How many?" she whispered, peering around the truck's bumper. 3 cars. Maybe 4. Jake checked his borrowed pistol, the weight unfamiliar in his calloused hands. Marcus wasn't lying about them tracking us. The irony wasn't lost on him. 2 weeks ago, his biggest worry had been making the mortgage payment on their failing farm. Now he was preparing for what might be his final gunfight, holding secrets worth billions to the pharmaceutical giants who would kill to bury them forever. The first set of headlights swept across the gravel lot, followed by the soft crunch of tires on stone. Car doors slammed with mechanical precision. Jake counted at least 6 distinct sounds, professional killers moving with practiced efficiency. "Mr. Williams, Miss Chen." The voice carried across the lot with cold authority. Jake recognized it immediately. Victoria Sterling, the woman who'd orchestrated this entire deadly chase. "You've led us quite a pursuit, but this ends now." Sarah's hand found Jake's in the darkness. Her fingers trembled, but her voice remained steady. "The reporter friend of Marcus's. You think she received our transmission?" "She better have." Jake squeezed back, remembering their desperate 20-minute data burst to Jessica Torres at the Washington Herald. If they died here, at least the truth about Prometheus would survive. The world would learn how Sterling Biotech had weaponized genetic research, turning healing into horror. Footsteps approached from multiple directions. They were being surrounded. Jake made a quick calculation. The silo's entrance was 30 yards away. If they could reach it, the maze of equipment inside might give them a fighting chance. "On my mark," he breathed against Sarah's ear. "Run for the door." "Williams." Sterling's voice was closer now, maybe 50 feet. "You have something that belongs to us. Return it, and we'll make this quick. Continue running, and I promise you'll beg for death before we're finished." Jake thought of his grandfather's farm, of the life he'd planned to build with Sarah among the cornfields. That future was gone, incinerated the moment they'd cracked open that old tractor engine and found the hidden research data. But maybe, just maybe, their sacrifice could prevent others from suffering the same fate. He raised his voice. "You know what your company did to those test subjects. 12 families destroyed because you couldn't be bothered with proper safety protocols. Progress requires sacrifice, Mr. Williams. Those families served a greater purpose." The casual cruelty in her tone ignited something fierce in Jake's chest. These people had treated human lives like spreadsheet entries, discarding anyone who threatened their profits. They'd killed Marcus, burned down half the county looking for them, and now expected to waltz away with their crimes buried. "Now," he hissed. They burst from cover simultaneously, sprinting across open ground as shouts erupted behind them. Muzzle flashes strobed in the darkness, bullets whining past their heads and sparking off concrete. Sarah stumbled, and Jake's heart lurched, but she kept running. The silo door was ancient and heavy. Jake slammed his shoulder against it, praying it wasn't locked. The rusted hinges screamed in protest but gave way, sending them tumbling into dusty blackness. This way. Sarah had spotted a ladder leading up to the grain chutes. They climbed desperately, their footsteps echoing in the cylindrical chamber. Behind them, tactical lights pierced the gloom. Professional voices coordinated the search with military precision. These weren't ordinary corporate security. Sterling had brought actual killers. At the top of the ladder, a narrow catwalk stretched across the silo's width. Jake tested it gingerly. The metal groaned but held their weight. Below, lights swept back and forth like deadly fireflies. Sarah pressed the flash drive into his palm. If something happens to me... Nothing's happening to either of us. But even as he said it, Jake could see their options dwindling. The catwalk ended at a sealed maintenance hatch. They were trapped 40 feet above their pursuers, with nowhere left to run. That's when he noticed the explosives. Old demolition charges, probably left over from the silo's planned destruction years ago. The copper wires were corroded, but the plastic-wrapped blocks looked intact. A desperate plan began forming in his mind. "Sarah, can you hotwire that detonator?" He followed his gaze and understood immediately. Her electrical engineering background, another remnant of their former lives, might be their salvation. Maybe. But if I'm wrong, we're dead anyway. Below them, the first tactical light found the ladder. Time was running out, and Jake realized their survival now depended on controlled destruction, bringing down the very building that sheltered them. The abandoned grain silo stood silhouetted against the dawn sky like a concrete monument to forgotten dreams. Sarah crouched behind the rusted pickup truck, her breath forming small clouds in the cold morning air. Beside her, Jake checked his phone one last time. The encrypted files were already uploading to news outlets across 3 continents. There was no turning back now. "They're coming," Marcus whispered from his position near the silo entrance. Through the morning mist, black SUVs materialized on the dirt road like predatory beetles. 3 vehicles, maybe 4. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs as she thought about the small canvas bag hidden inside the silo, the bag containing the remaining diamonds and the documents that would expose everything. The SUVs stopped 50 yards away. Car doors slammed in rapid succession, followed by the unmistakable sound of weapons being readied. Sarah recognized the tall figure of Vincent Kruger as he stepped into view, his expensive suit looking absurdly out of place in the rural setting. Behind him came 6 armed men, moving with military precision. "We know you're here," Kruger's voice carried clearly across the open ground. "This doesn't have to end badly for anyone. We just want our property back." Sarah almost laughed at the word property. The diamonds hidden in that old tractor engine hadn't belonged to Kruger's people. They were blood diamonds, stolen from African mines and smuggled through a network that stretched from Johannesburg to Chicago. The papers they'd found with the gems detailed decades of exploitation, murder, and corruption, reaching into the highest levels of government. Jake squeezed her shoulder and pointed toward the back of the silo. Their escape route, a drainage culvert that led to the creek, was still clear, but they needed more time for the upload to complete. The progress bar on Jake's phone showed 87%. "You have 30 seconds, Kruger called out. "Then we're coming in." Marcus suddenly stood up, his hands raised. Sarah's breath caught in her throat as her brother-in-law walked slowly toward the armed men. "Okay," he shouted. "You win. The stuff's inside the silo, but I want guarantees that my family walks away from this." Kruger smiled, but it was the cold expression of a shark. "Mr. Patterson, you've caused us considerable trouble. The contents of that bag are worth more than your little farm, but the documents—" He shook his head. "Those are priceless to us. And fatal to you if they become public. Then we have a problem," Marcus said, stopping 20 feet away. "Because those documents went public about 10 minutes ago." The silence that followed was broken only by the distant sound of a train whistle. Sarah watched Kruger's face transform as the implications sank in. His hand moved toward the gun holstered under his jacket. That's when the FBI agents emerged from the cornfield. Sarah had never been so happy to see Agent Rebecca Torres in her life. The federal agent stepped into the clearing with her weapon drawn. followed by a dozen other agents who seemed to materialize from the landscape itself. The weeks of secret negotiations, the careful coordination, it had all led to this moment. "Vincent Kruger, you're under arrest," Torres announced. "Federal charges include racketeering, conspiracy, and about 15 other felonies I'll read to you later." Kruger's men found themselves surrounded, their weapons suddenly useless. But Kruger himself wasn't finished. In one fluid motion, he drew his pistol and aimed it directly at Marcus. "This ends here," he snarled. "If those files are public, then loose ends need to be tied up." The gunshot cracked across the morning air like thunder. But it wasn't Kruger who fired. Agent Torres's bullet caught him in the shoulder, spinning him around and sending his weapon flying. He crumpled to the ground, cursing and clutching his wounded arm. Sarah found herself running toward Marcus, Jake close behind her. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely function, but Marcus was alive, grinning despite everything they'd been through. "Is it over?" she asked Torres as the agent secured the scene. "The immediate threat is over," the agent replied. "But this investigation is just beginning. Those documents you found are going to bring down a network we've been chasing for years. You three are going to be very important witnesses." Jake's phone finally chimed. "Upload complete," he announced. "The story's out there now. Every major news outlet has copies." As they walked toward the federal vehicles, Sarah looked back at the grain silo one last time. 3 months ago, she'd been a broke farmer facing foreclosure. Now she was a millionaire with a target on her back. But more importantly, she was someone who had helped expose a truth that needed to be told. The morning sun climbed higher, burning away the mist and revealing a landscape that looked exactly the same as always. But everything had changed. The truth was out there now, spreading faster than any of Kruger's people could contain it. Sometimes, Sarah thought, the most important discoveries happen when you're just trying to fix an old tractor.